Hello, welcome. And today we're back with another tier list video, where I'll be showing you what are, in my opinion, the best emulators to play on each platform. Just to make things clear right from the start, in this video, the main focus will be evaluating the improvements each emulator can offer compared to the original hardware. So we'll be considering factors like removing that overly pixelated look, improving polygon rendering through modern techniques such as anti-aliasing, higher resolutions, graphical filters, and other features that help modernize the experience. On top of that, I'll also heavily consider ease of use. Emulators that offer automatic game settings, simplified installation, and less need for manual tweaking will have priority, simply because that creates a much better experience for most users. And it's also worth mentioning that this entire tier list is being based mainly on the experience of using these emulators on Windows. Now, let's quickly move on to today's sponsor messages. If you want to buy original games while saving a lot, check out Instant Gaming, the digital store that sells games for various platforms, such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch. Get games of all genres with discounts of up to 95%. You'll also find a variety of gift cards and credits for other services. You can pay for your order through your credit card on a website with a 4.7 rating on Trustpilot. You're buying games directly from Instant Gaming, not from other retailers. If you encounter any issues, Instant Gaming offers 24/7 support. What are you waiting for to save? Links in the description. Starting with retro games, I always like to make one thing clear. If you only play one or two games from specific platforms, I'll rarely recommend using a separate emulator for every single console. Because honestly, if I tried to list the absolute best emulator individually for every retro platform, this video would probably end up being over 3 hours long. So, focusing mainly on 2D games and practicality, I have two main recommendations. RetroArch, unfortunately, still has a fairly complicated setup process for people who don't have much experience. There are core settings, video settings, specific options for each core, shaders, and several other things that end up making everything much more complex. In the end, the results are usually excellent, but that entire process can scare away people who just want to open a game and relax without headaches. So because of that complexity, it lands in Tier B. On the other side, as an excellent option for retro gaming, we have Mezen, which almost didn't make this list because it hasn't received major updates in quite some time. Unlike RetroArch, everything here is much simpler. You basically configure your controller and start playing. The only downside is the smaller number of supported systems, such as the lack of Sega Genesis support, for example. Even so, the emulation quality is often superior to RetroArch in many scenarios, so it comfortably earns a Tier A spot. And to close out the retro gaming section, we can't forget arcades. Even though they work well inside RetroArch, if you want a better and more practical experience, my recommendation is still FBNeo. Its setup process is much simpler than MAME, without all the hassle of manually organizing multiple BIOS files. In fact, I specifically recommend FBNeo because MAME's interface still feels extremely archaic, and configuring it is still complicated even today. Even without major recent updates, it remains one of the best arcade experiences currently available, so it also earns Tier A. Now let's talk about the Sega Saturn, one of my favorite platforms, but also one of the most problematic systems in the world of emulation. We have many abandoned, outdated, or simply bad emulators. And before even starting, I'll already make it clear that Midnafin was left out of this list. I know a lot of people love it, but besides the lack of recent updates, several other projects have evolved much more over the last few years. Starting with BizHawk, which despite being a multi-system emulator, shines quite a lot when it comes to Sega Saturn. Many people consider it one of the best Saturn emulators available today. The setup is relatively simple, and the experience is practically one-to-one with original hardware. On the other hand, it barely offers modern enhancements for polygons, shadows, or 2D elements. But since many people specifically prefer that absolute hardware accuracy, it comfortably deserves Tier A. Chronos almost got left out of this list as well because of the lack of recent updates, but ignoring the project would be unfair. It delivers excellent emulation while also adding very interesting improvements for both polygonal games and 2D visuals. So it becomes the first emulator in this category to reach Tier S, precisely because it offers an experience superior to original hardware in practically every aspect. Just like Chronos, Yabasanshiro also brings very important improvements for anyone playing Sega Saturn games on modern displays, especially 1080p monitors or higher. On top of that, it still receives frequent updates, includes automatic presets for various controllers, and has an extremely simple setup process. Even though compatibility can still be lacking in a few games, the extra features more than compensate for it. So it also earns a spot in Tier S. And the newest emulator on this list is Emulator. It's still in the early stages of development, but it already supports a very decent portion of the Saturn library. Compatibility improves with every update, but currently the experience still stays very close to original hardware. Visual enhancements and anti-aliasing in polygonal games are still somewhat lacking, so in its current state it ends up in Tier A. The original PlayStation has now officially surpassed 30 years, and currently there are basically 2 truly relevant emulators still in active development, or maintenance. Both deliver excellent experiences, but with very different philosophies. Starting with EPSA, which probably brings a wave of nostalgia for almost everyone who emulated PlayStation on PC back in the day. However, many of its systems are now considered outdated. Even after receiving a major update recently to improve compatibility with modern operating systems, it still relies heavily on external plugins, and that creates incompatibilities that more modern projects already solve directly in their main code base. On top of that, some games still suffer from slowdowns, and the emulator's upscaling system no longer matches current standards. It lacks modern features that truly improve the experience on high-resolution displays, so it lands in Tier B. Meanwhile, DuckStation had an extremely solid development cycle and has now practically entered maintenance mode, receiving mostly small fixes because honestly, it's already nearly perfect. The emulator currently has automatic settings for practically everything. You no longer need to spend hours on forums trying to figure out which graphics API to use, which configuration to apply, or which plugin to install. The emulator handles almost everything automatically in most situations. It also has excellent support for modern controllers, including generic ones. In my opinion, DuckStation is basically the holy grail of PlayStation 1 emulation, so it easily deserves Tier S. The Nintendo 64, much like the Sega Saturn, remains an extremely difficult console to emulate properly even today. Here I decided to test both newer emulators and some interesting RetroArch cores to see which ones are actually worth using nowadays, starting with Gopher 64, which honestly I didn't even know existed before making this video. Despite receiving frequent updates, it still delivers relatively low visual quality. Even using 8x internal resolution, the visual improvement is fairly small and the image remains quite blurry. On top of that, it still preserves several of the original console's slowdowns. So in its current state, it ends up in Tier B. EMG, which works as a frontend for Mupen 64 Plus, already delivers an extremely competent experience. It offers very interesting graphical improvements, decent resolution scaling, and anti-aliasing, bringing exactly the type of experience we're trying to achieve in this video. Overall, the setup process is simple and straightforward, so even someone with very little emulation experience can achieve impressive visual quality and gameplay without touching dozens of settings. So it comfortably deserves Tier A. And for those who missed the old Project 64, we now have Luna's Project 64, which seems to perfectly embrace the role of a spiritual successor to the classic emulator. And honestly, it performs very well. The visuals look excellent, gameplay is significantly improved compared to original hardware, and it barely requires complex setup. This is probably the emulator that will appeal most to casual users. However, it still struggles in some important areas, such as plugin dependency and support limited only to X input. So if you use PlayStation controllers, for example, you'll still need third-party applications. Based purely on visual quality and decent emulation, it would easily deserve Tier A, but because of those controller limitations and the still archaic plugin system, it ends up in Tier B. Now talking about RetroArch cores, using the Mupen 64 Plus core, even with all the configuration options available, the final result still suffers from heavy aliasing, lack of anti-aliasing, and even issues with certain 2D elements in some games. So honestly, if you like Mupen 64 Plus, it's still much more worthwhile to use EMG as the front end. Because of that, this RetroArch core ends up in Tier B. Another RetroArch core that works very well for Nintendo 64 is Parallel. And this one actually manages to deliver a truly enhanced experience. We get anti-aliasing support, higher internal resolutions, and significant improvements over the traditional slowdowns of the original N64 hardware. So for those who don't want to use a standalone emulator and prefer staying inside the RetroArch ecosystem, it becomes an excellent option. As long as you have the patience to configure RetroArch properly, the final result is very good. So it definitely deserves tier A. The Dreamcast, Sega's final console and still one of the most beloved systems among Sega fans, continues to have an excellent library filled with memorable games. And even though there are several emulators available for it, in this video we're going to focus on the two main ones, Redream and Flycast. Starting with Redream, it comes in two versions, a free one and a paid one. The version we tested here was the free version. And honestly, I expected a little more from it. For example, resolution upscaling is only available in the paid version. In the free version, games are basically limited to HD resolution, or even lower than that. On top of that, save state slots are also restricted in the free release. It's not something that personally bothers me too much, but it still feels strange to lock features that nowadays almost every emulator offers for free. Even so, the emulator still provides a solid experience, includes some automated settings, and most users probably won't need to spend hours tweaking options for each individual game. Overall, it's still a very good emulator, but limiting resolution upscaling in the free version definitely hurts it a bit. It's basically like buying a hot dog and being charged extra for the sausage. So because of that, it ends up in tier A. On the other side, we have Flycast, which not only emulates the Dreamcast extremely well, but also supports Naomi and Naomi 2, Sega arcade systems with a massive library, especially Japanese fighting games and other arcade classics. The emulator is incredibly simple to set up, unless you want to use very specific peripherals, like the House of the Dead light gun for example. Aside from that, practically everything works right out of the box. It also includes plenty of graphical improvements, texture pack support, anti-aliasing, and even widescreen hacks. Unfortunately, it doesn't offer automatic per-game presets, but honestly, you'll rarely ever need them. Flycast delivers an excellent experience almost all the time, so it easily deserves tier S. The Nintendo DS was a revolutionary handheld from Nintendo, featuring a fantastic library, especially involving Pokémon, Mario, and many RPGs that remain extremely popular even today. There are several emulators available for the system, but the two main ones are still the SMUME and MelinDS. Starting with the SMUME, this emulator went quite a long time without receiving updates, but recently it started evolving again with important improvements. Overall, it's extremely lightweight and can run on practically any PC. However, it still struggles in some 2D games. In certain cases, HUD elements disappear, and the upscaling for 2D titles also isn't particularly impressive. So despite still being functional and highly accessible, it ends up in tier B. Meanwhile, MelinDS handles 2D games much better, correctly rendering nearly all graphical elements while also offering several filters for image customization. On the 3D side, it also delivers excellent results, with support for anti-aliasing and multiple options to arrange the DS screens however the user prefers. So it also deserves tier A. And honestly, between MelinDS and the SMUME, I would pick MelinDS without thinking twice nowadays. Now moving on to PlayStation 2, there are indeed some new emulators appearing, but honestly, most of them still aren't worth testing yet. One example is the Aorus project, which has been in development for quite some time but still struggles to run even lighter PS2 games. Right now, it simply isn't recommended. In fact, I couldn't even capture decent enough gameplay footage to show in this video. So it ends up becoming the first project on this list to land in tier C. On the other hand, we have the legendary PCSX2. For a long time, especially during the version 1.4 era, many people considered the emulator bad and extremely complicated. But the evolution from version 1.4 to 1.7 and then to the current builds has been absolutely insane. Today, PCSX2 can run practically the entire PS2 library with excellent quality. Very few games still present truly serious issues. On top of that, almost every peripheral can now be emulated properly. The emulator also includes automation for thousands of different controllers, automatic graphics API selection, and several game-specific fixes, saving users countless hours of manual configuration. Even obscure games usually already have presets configured automatically. So honestly, PCSX2 easily deserves tier S. And wrapping up the PlayStation 2 section, we have Play, an emulator that has been in development for a very long time but still suffers from some major problems. One of the biggest examples is its Vulkan API implementation. If you use OpenGL, the emulator allows resolution upscaling and various visual enhancements normally. However, when switching to Vulkan, which usually provides far better performance on most modern hardware, the emulator simply locks everything to native resolution. And this problem has existed for years. On top of that, Play's compatibility is still far from ideal, correctly running less than half of the PlayStation 2 library. So it ends up in Tier B. It does deliver some interesting ideas, but still far below what's expected today. When it comes to Sony's first handheld, the PSP, there are technically some other emulation projects out there, but honestly there's barely any reason to spend time talking about them because PPS-SPP completely crushes all of its competitors. Just like PCSX2, it includes automatic video settings, automatic graphics API selection, optimized presets, and even automatic controller configuration. And the most impressive part is that you can run it even on an Android device that's over 10 years old with only 1 GB of RAM while still maintaining surprisingly good performance. So honestly, there's no possible place for this emulator other than Tier S. The original Xbox seems to have a much more important library than many people realize, especially because of exclusives like the first Forza Motorsport, some dead or alive titles, and several other games that remain trapped on the platform. Unfortunately though, its emulators still feel stuck in 2022. Starting with CXBX Reloaded, it has remained practically frozen at the same compatibility list of around 166 games ever since I first started following the project. And honestly, it had everything needed to surpass Cemu, which we'll talk about next. Its resolution scaling requires far less hardware, and its graphical features are much lighter on the GPU. However, once we start talking about accuracy, the problems begin. Several graphical effects are rendered incorrectly, many games fail to boot at all, and others suffer from severe gameplay bugs. So unfortunately it ends up in Tier C. On the other side, we have Cemu, which has actually received important updates recently, especially regarding Vulkan API implementation, bringing performance gains and fixing issues in multiple games. However, some serious limitations still remain. The hardware demand for running higher resolutions is still extremely high. There's still no proper support for running original Xbox executable files, and the emulator basically only accepts ISOs. Recently, save states and automatic controller configuration were also added, which is always welcome. So despite its problems, it still delivers a decent experience and deserves Tier B. The Xbox 360 is another extremely difficult console when it comes to emulation. Right now, we basically have a single main project with several forks derived from it. And unfortunately, in almost all of them you still need third-party applications just to get a minimally decent user interface and individual game settings. The project also hasn't received a truly revolutionary update in a very long time and still suffers from low compatibility in several titles. The most basic version is what we'll call Xenia Master, which is essentially the original project where all other forks originated from. There's even the famous story that the project was basically developed by 2 people in a garage, so obviously we have to recognize its historical importance. But nowadays, using it is practically the same thing as running an extremely old build of Xenia Canary. So it ends up in Tier C, probably being the weakest emulator on this list. Meanwhile, Xenia Canary does practically everything better than Xenia Master. Games run better, compatibility is higher, and accuracy has also improved significantly. There's still a very long way to go before Xbox 360 emulation can be considered perfect. But currently, especially on Windows, it's still the best emulator available for the platform, even without a truly modern native UI or automatic per-game settings. So it deserves Tier B. Lastly, we have Xenia Edge, the newest fork among all of them. It already includes an integrated user interface and support for per-game configurations. However, the project's main focus is improving the Vulkan API, especially with future Linux compatibility in mind. And we already know that not even Xenia Canary has managed to implement Vulkan in a truly solid way until now. Xenia Edge is still evolving heavily in this area and improving the API almost day after day. They still haven't reached the ideal level yet, but honestly if they achieve that goal, it could eventually surpass Xenia Canary even on Windows. So for now, it also lands in Tier B. If you watched previous versions of this video, you probably noticed that the number of Nintendo 3DS emulators has dropped significantly. After the shutdown of Citra alongside Yuzu, several developers attempted to revive the original project, but most of those forks have now been abandoned. Today, we basically only have Grisehue, maintained mainly by a former Citra developer alongside the former Lime 3DS developer, Grisehue Plus, and Panda 3DS, which is a completely separate emulator built from scratch. Starting with Grisehue, it's easily the best 3DS emulator currently available. After the developer restored support for 3DS format files, a lot of people were extremely happy, especially those using fan translations and ROM hacks that often broke during conversion to other formats. The developer listened to the community, restored the feature, and at the same time managed to avoid legal issues with Nintendo. Right now, Grisehue continues receiving new features and improvements practically every month and has already established itself as the best 3DS emulator for Windows. So it easily deserves Tier S. Grisehue Plus originally appeared specifically to solve the lack of 3DS file support in standard Grisehue, which is no longer really an issue today. So theoretically, I could simply recommend the default Grisehue. However, Grisehue Plus recently added some very interesting conveniences for people who want to play online without owning a real console to dump system files. So I still consider it a valid recommendation. It doesn't quite reach Grisehue's level, but it remains useful in certain specific situations. Because of that, it lands in Tier A. As for Panda 3DS, despite being a brand new emulator built entirely from scratch, it's already impressive considering how much it can run. However, like almost every new project, it still struggles even with relatively simple games. On top of that, it still lacks resolution upscaling, anti-aliasing, and more advanced options for customizing the 3DS screens, which makes a huge difference in the final experience. So for now, it ends up in Tier C. From this point onward, we'll basically have only one dominant emulator per platform, at least until we reach Nintendo Switch. Starting with PlayStation 3, we have RPCS 3. And honestly, in my opinion, it deserves to exist in a tier above every other emulator on this list. Right now, practically all game-specific settings can be downloaded automatically with a single click. Controllers are detected and configured automatically. Most patches already appear ready to enable, and basically the only thing users really need to choose is the resolution and which mods or patches they want to use. Everything else is practically automated. Unfortunately, the heaviest PS3 exclusives still require extremely powerful hardware, but emulator performance continues improving month after month. So obviously it belongs in Tier S. Vita 3K is currently the main PlayStation Vita emulator. And although Sony's handheld doesn't have an enormous Western library, there are still some excellent exclusives that make the experience worthwhile. However, honestly, the emulator still feels unfinished. It has received important improvements over time, includes some automation features, and also offers enhancements over the original hardware experience. But there's still a lot missing before it becomes truly user-friendly for casual players. So overall, it ends up in Tier B. Cemu is the legendary Nintendo Wii U emulator, known for many years basically as the Zelda Breath of the Wild emulator. And honestly, a huge portion of what we see today in modern emulation first appeared in Cemu. Vulkan API in 3D games, asynchronous shader compilation, aggressive performance optimizations. The emulator's legacy is massive. Wii U controller setup may not be the simplest thing in the world, mainly because of the gamepad's peculiarities, but once configured, you can enjoy the console almost to its fullest with extremely low hardware requirements by today's standards. So it easily deserves Tier S. Shad PS4, much like Cemu, became extremely famous mainly because of a single game, Bloodborne. And even today, almost every major improvement in the project continues focusing on it, while much of the PlayStation 4 library still remains in the background. The project also became involved in some controversies recently, especially after removing the feature that allowed games to be installed directly through the emulator, something that made life much harder for regular users. So despite being an excellent project and already delivering an experience very close to original hardware in some titles, the lack of attention to other games and the need for third-party apps for installation significantly hurts usability. Because of that, it lands in Tier A. Before we talk about Nintendo Switch emulation, don't forget to leave a like. This video took more than 2 weeks to finish and practically destroyed the channel's schedule during that time, so I really appreciate your support. And if you want to support this project even further, which is currently one of the few channels producing deep technical content about emulation, consider becoming a member. And of course, if this is your first time here, consider subscribing so you don't miss the weekly videos. Finally reaching the Nintendo Switch, we currently have an emulation scene that feels practically abandoned. And honestly, even though developers often blame the community, the biggest issue here is clearly the conflicts between the devs themselves. That transformed a scene that used to be a reference for performance and innovation into something dominated by drama, empty changelogs, and magic fixes done almost blindly. First, I'll quickly talk about the emulators I no longer recommend using. Not necessarily because they're bad, but because their current forks simply do everything better. The original Ryujinx, for example, ended up trapped in an extremely accuracy-focused approach, which massively increased hardware requirements without necessarily bringing real benefits for most users. The original Yuzu also became obsolete, mainly because current forks have already surpassed practically everything it used to offer, delivering higher compatibility and better performance. Sudachi looked like an extremely promising Yuzu fork, but it was abandoned very quickly because of conflicts involving developers tied to the old Citroen project. So you basically followed the exact same path. It never implemented any major innovations, and today there's simply no reason left to use it. And finally, we have Torzu. And honestly, this is the saddest case of all. The project was once extremely promising and was one of the first to properly run heavy Unreal Engine games like Shadow Generations. However, development was handled almost entirely by a single person on the dark web, someone who remained extremely low profile for a long time. Nowadays, finding updated and safe Torzu builds on the surface web is practically impossible. So all of these emulators end up in Tier C. If you're still using any of them, honestly, it's probably time to move on to newer projects. Now moving on to the projects that are still truly worth using, starting with Citroen Neo. It finally seems like the emulator solved the infamous antivirus false positive issue, something that was incredibly annoying, especially because the emulator receives updates almost daily. So every time you updated it, you had to recreate antivirus exceptions just to allow the program to run. When I interviewed the developers, I also asked about the old switch verification system that existed in the original Citroen and that many users hated. At the time, they claimed they wouldn't implement it again. Eventually they did, and then removed it again afterward. So honestly, the team still seems a little lost regarding how they want to manage the project. Overall, the emulator supports community-made presets, patch installation from specialized websites, and several useful automation features. However, the interface still suffers from occasional bugs, and the emulator continues struggling heavily with Unreal Engine games, an area where Eden already managed to solve several issues more effectively. So it ends up in Tier A. Eden was easily one of the most promising projects of this new generation of Switch emulators. However, time passed and honestly, very little truly revolutionary happened. On top of that, there's that absurd laziness regarding proper changelogs. In many cases, they almost look AI-generated, which honestly feels kind of pathetic. Speaking of AI, the old Citroen team constantly accused the project of using AI-based approaches to automatically fix bugs. In some cases it worked, in others it simply broke games even further. This year, the emulator also suffered a Nintendo DMCA, which significantly slowed development. Right now, a major new version seems to be coming soon, but honestly, even by the project's first anniversary, there still wasn't that much genuinely new to show. At least now it has started reaching a better level of automation, similar to Citroen, making it easier to install multiple mods simultaneously. Throughout its existence, it was also one of the projects that fixed the largest number of problematic games. So it deserves Tier A. Now talking about Ryujinx. After Nintendo's DMCA, some former developers returned to the project, but even they admitted they can no longer deliver major breakthroughs alone and asked the community for help. Right now, this is probably the slowest moving project among all of them. Changelogs practically became a luxury item over there. Users almost never know exactly what changed from one version to another. Some people claim that's to avoid issues with Nintendo, while others say it's just pure laziness. During the Ryujinx era, the emulator came very close to Eden and Citroen in performance across multiple games, but at some point the focus shifted back toward extreme accuracy, which significantly hurt performance again. So nowadays it ends up being the emulator recommended mainly for people with extremely powerful hardware or for specific cases where games have problems in Yuzu forks. Because of that, it lands in Tier B. And finally, we have Kenji NX, a Ryujinx fork maintained basically by a single developer with a primary focus on Android. Precisely because it depends almost entirely on one person, updates tend to be slower, and many bugs take a long time to get fixed. Aside from that, its feature set is extremely similar to the original Ryujinx. So it also ends up in Tier B. I'll leave the image with the final tier list in the video description for anyone who wants to download it, save it for future reference, or even create their own custom list. I'll also leave a document with links to all the still active projects mentioned in this video, so you can download everything safely and directly from the proper sources. And that was the video. Don't forget to leave a like before leaving. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.